What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we are going to be taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC 262 from a betting perspective. Hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, put together better DraftKings lineups, and hopefully earn some extra cash. And if you'd like to see how we performed last week, I dropped a recap video on Monday where we go over all our bets from last week and take a look at our profit and loss. So head on over to my channel, Diary of a Pro Gambler, and you can see the video here. This is something that I'm going to be doing every week from now on. Every Monday and Tuesday I'm going to be dropping a video going over our bets from the previous week to show you guys how we did. And don't forget, if you'd like to watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights that I won't have time to cover in this video, head on over to my website mmabettingtips.com. The link is in the description below. Throughout the week, as I research each of these matchups, I'll be posting 10 to 20 minute detailed breakdown videos for every single fight on this card, and I'll also be uploading all of my fight research to the website, so you'll be able to watch 1 to 2 hour videos that go into super depth on each of the matchups from this week. On top of that, you'll find a VIP chat room where you can discuss betting on MMA with other very experienced gamblers at MMA, and on top of that, you can tell my exact bets. On the website, you'll find prop bets, over-under bets, straight-up money line bets, and even live bets if you want to tail us with our live bets for this week. Live betting is highly profitable on the UFC. Strongly recommend you give it a try. We've actually got a couple of spaces available for this week, so if you go to the live betting tips section of the website, I think we've got 2 or 3 spaces available for this week. They will sell pretty fast, so come and join us. You won't be disappointed. You will absolutely love live betting with us. Jump in, give it a try, and you will not be disappointed. But this week, we've also got something very exciting happening on Friday night. This week is going to be our first ever UFC trading card box break. So here, I've got a box of the brand new UFC Panini Prizm debut edition cards. Not one box, but I've got 2 boxes, and I've got more boxes on the way. I'm very passionate about these cards. I've personally invested about $10,000 into these UFC Panini Prizm cards, and I am very much looking forward to cracking one of these boxes open with you guys live on stream on Friday night. If we go to the box breaks section of the website, just roll the mouse over community, go to box breaks. This Friday night box break has already sold out, and if you don't know what a box break is, it's basically where you purchase a pack from within a box of very valuable trading cards, and then I will open that pack live on stream to see what pulls you got, what cards you got in your pack, and then send them out to you. The UFC Panini Prizm debut edition is a fantastic set because it's the very first set of Panini UFC trading cards, and every single box is guaranteed to contain 2 autograph cards and 22 Panini Prizm cards, which means every single pack, every single one of the 12 packs in a hobby box contains 2 rare cards, either a signed card or a Prizm card, which gives you a pretty good chance of pulling something pretty good. So these debut edition boxes are absolutely excellent. They're obviously flying up in value. I've got 2 of them here. I've got more coming in the post, and I'm going to have a lot of fun opening these with you on Friday night. So I want to say a big shout out, a massive thank you to everyone in my community that bought a pack of cards from this set. It's a new, exciting thing that I'm trying. It was a big gamble. I've spent a lot of money on these. I wasn't sure if you guys would be interested. But these the packs in this box literally sold out within like an hour. So can't thank you guys enough. And I'm very much looking forward to pulling something cool out of these boxes for you guys on Friday night. So the box break live stream will be going live on YouTube, Twitch, and my website at 11 p.m. British time, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Now, I know that the date is listed for Friday, June the 11th, but this is for the next box break, because my plan is to do a box break for UFC trading cards, be it the old valuable vintage stuff where you can get like Conor McGregor rookie cards or John Jones rookie cards, or I'm going to do the modern stuff, the Prizm stuff, the selects, the UFC select cards that come out in July. I'm going to be doing a box break now every single month, once a month, the night before every big UFC pay-per-view card. So obviously This weekend, we've got UFC 262. The box break is already sold out for that card, but we're going to be doing the next one the night before UFC 263, Adesanya versus Vettori, where we crack open 2 boxes of UFC Panini Prism. If you'd like to buy a pack from, that box break, all you need to do, MMABettingTips.com, link in the description below, go to Community, Box Breaks, and you can buy now. Obviously, there were 24 packs available in this box break. We've got 16 still available. They went on sale yesterday. I would expect these to sell very, very fast. And then as soon as we get through this box break for UFC 263, I'm cooking up something pretty fucking special for UFC 264. I want to do something big to celebrate International Fight Week and a big event, UFC 264, McGregor versus Poirier. And I love these UFC Panini Prism sets because there's so many cool cards in these boxes, so many valuable cards. Just this week we saw a 1/1 black Khabib Nurmagomedov Prism card sell for $28,300. It had 66 bids. There is tons and tons of interest in these UFC Panini Prism cards, and while we can't pull a 1/1 Khabib card in this box because obviously it's been pulled, we've got the Jorge Masvidal, the Israel Adesanya, the Conor McGregor, the Color Blast cards. Hopefully there will be something cool in the box that we crack open this Friday. If you just check on the UFC Panini Prism Color Blast cards, you can see that these cards are going for some pretty big amounts. There is a BGS 10 Pristine Beckett Conor McGregor Color Blast, currently listed for $17,000. There's some big ticket cards in these boxes, and I'm looking forward to cracking one open on Friday night. So come join us for the live stream. Even if you're not interested in box breaks, you're not interested in UFC trading cards, come hang out on Friday night and see what cards the guys pull. And again, can't thank you enough. If you have bought a pack in these box breaks, it means a lot to me because I'm very, very passionate about investing in rare collectibles. I'm passionate about these UFC trading cards, and by you getting involved and buying a pack in these box breaks, it just is going to enable us all to open up some really cool sets on stream, see some really cool cards, and appreciate some amazing collectibles. So Friday night is going to be a lot of fun. So what else we have to talk about? Prop bets. It is that time in the stream where we do, that time in the video where we do a business deal. Let's talk about a business deal. If this video gets 300 likes, I will do a prop bet live stream this Saturday where we go through all of the fights taking place this weekend at UFC 262 to try and dig up a decent value prop for every single fight on this card. Prop bets are profitable, you guys love them, and a hell of a lot more than 300 people watch those prop bet live streams. So hit the like button below and let's get that prop bet live stream popping on Saturday. And also don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Now let's get into the fights. This is what you're all here for. Let's get into the first fight that we're going to talk about, which is Matt Schnell versus Rogerio Bontorin. But before we get into talking about the fights on this card, there are a few macro X factors with this event which I feel it's worth talking about, because I feel that these macro X factors will have an influence on all of the fights taking place this weekend, and so it's very, very important to have them in mind when you're thinking about betting the fights. So the first thing that we've got to take into consideration is that we saw last month at UFC 261 in Jacksonville, Florida, the atmosphere in the arena was absolutely insane. Obviously, there was a lot of pent-up energy, and the atmosphere in the arena was electric, where fans just hadn't been able to go and watch live sports for a really long time, certainly not the UFC. And so from the very first fight to the very last fight, the atmosphere was electric. I've only seen an atmosphere like that a handful of times in the 20 years that I've been watching the UFC. The first time the UFC did an event in Dublin, a few crazy events that the UFC have done in Brazil, but for the most part, the atmosphere in the arena at UFC shows is a lot more tame, particularly early on in the card. I remember watching Ariane Carnelossi and Na Liang walking out for the very first fight of the night at UFC 261, and I'm not going to say any fighter is ever scared because they're absolute warriors, but you could see, particularly Ariane Carnelossi, she was visibly shook as she was walking out of the cage. with the crazy atmosphere in the arena clearly weighing on her, and it's completely normal. The fighters, they've been locked down just like we have for a year. They may have had to train with limited training partners in their gym, or spent the majority of time locked down at home, maybe training in their garage. So when suddenly they're thrown into into an arena full of 15,000-20,000 people going crazy, it's obviously going to be a shock to the system, especially if their last 2 or 3 fights have been on Fight Island or the Apex Center behind closed doors. And we saw at UFC 261 the crowd have a massive influence on how the fighters performed. If we just take a look at UFC 261, we can see that there were 13 fights that took place at UFC 261, and a massive number of them ended inside the distance. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the 13 fights at UFC 261 ended inside the distance. And we could see the crowd had a big influence on how the fighters performed. We saw a few fighters come out really hard in round 1, an adrenaline dump. And we saw fighters just go to war, man. We saw fighters that just got involved in these crazy, reckless, scrappy wars where it was inevitable that someone was going to get finished. And we saw some fighters underperform, under the weight of the crowd. Performance anxiety got the best of them, and they didn't perform to their best of their ability. And then we saw other fighters like Anthony Smith that really rose to the occasion. The crowd in the arena fueled Anthony Smith, and it drove him to put in his best performance in a very long time. So when we're thinking about betting these fights this weekend at UFC 262, it's the first time the UFC have been back to Texas in a long time. I know Texas has been open up a lot longer than other parts of the world, but I'm sure that the energy in the arena is going to be just as crazy as it was in Jacksonville. And I'm expecting, another crazy atmosphere from the fans in Houston, Texas this weekend at UFC 262, which again could have a big influence on how the fighters perform. So you've got to be thinking this weekend, we're not betting on robots. This is something we state in every single breakdown video. I always find it hilarious that you get these really bullish, brash, overly confident guys come into my comment section every week and say, you're totally wrong about this fight. Such and such fighter has a 100% chance of winning. There's no way they can lose. And to me, it's so funny because these guys are the most overconfident idiots in the world, and they just don't understand that this is actually showing a massive lack of experience. We're not betting on robots. We have no idea how the fighters are going to show up and perform on fight night. All we can do is consistently put our money in strong positions and hope that at the end of the day we make more money than we lose, and we certainly do. If you look at my website, we've got a long history of grinding out profits, betting on various different aspects of MMA, from prop bets to live bets, from pre-fight bets to over-unders. They're all profitable, but you're going to take a lot of losses along the way because we're betting on humans, and we don't know how humans are going to react and perform in high pressure situations. And UFC 262 is certainly going to be high pressure and absolutely electrifying for the fighters this weekend. It's going to affect them all in different ways, so you really need to bear that in mind when you're betting these fights. Another X factor that we've got to take into consideration is that this event is obviously taking place in Texas, and the Texas State Athletic Commission is one of the worst athletic commissions in the United States for judging. Quite frankly, they're a joke. Recently in the UFC, we've seen some very, very bad judging, some real bad scorecards. And if you think they were bad in Vegas at the Apex Center under the Nevada State Athletic Commission, wait until you see how bad the judging is going to be this weekend at UFC 262. So this is another additional risk to bet in this event. Just know that if you're betting on fights that are likely to go the distance or could be competitive, just know that the judging is so fucking bad in Texas that if a fight goes to the scorecards, any scorecard is possible. These judges are an absolute joke. And the third X factor that we've got to take into consideration on this card is that now that fans are starting to come back into the arena, home advantage is something that we're going to be talking about again. So if you've followed my channel for a long time, if you've followed my work for a long time, you'll know that home advantage is a pretty big deal in MMA, but it's not something we've had to talk about for over a year now while we've been locked down holding events in the Apex Center and on Fight Island. But now that we're going back to, new territories with local fighters and fans in the arena that are going to get behind those local fighters and support them, home advantage is something that we're going to have to start talking about. And there are 2 fighters from Texas on this card. Andrea KGB Lee, of course, is from Texas. She walks to the weigh-ins wearing a cowboy or cowgirl hat, and of course, when she's allowed to by whatever kit sponsor we've got, it was Reebok, it's now Venom, she will also like to walk to the actual octagon in a cowboy hat. So the crowd are going to get behind Andrea Lee in a really big way. Every time she has a little bit of success, the crowd's going to go crazy. You can imagine how big the crowd is going to pop when Bruce Buffer announces Andrea Lee's name and reads out that she's fighting out of Texas. The crowd's going to go fucking nuts. And that gives her a big edge because we know the crowd can influence the judges. On top of that, the crowd is very, very good for driving a fighter, motivating him and pushing him forward. Why do people hire personal trainers, right? People hire personal trainers for encouragement and motivation. If you're just working out by yourself and you're on the treadmill, doing road work, it's easy for you to quit when you start to get tired. But if you've got a personal trainer pushing you, it's nowhere near as easy to quit or underperform. A crowd can have exactly the same impact. If Andrea Lee is starting to feel tired or gets put in a bad position in the fight, that crowd can lift her by getting behind her and driving her to perform better. So home advantage is a very big deal in MMA. Andrea Lee is in a competitive fight this weekend against Antonina Shevchenko, but maybe that crowd will be the difference. And I know there will be some people that will say, well, hang on a minute, Andrea Lee lost a close decision to Lauren Murphy in Texas. The judges didn't help her there. Andrea Lee clearly won the fight and they went with Murphy, and I get it. There will always be exceptions to the rule, but as a general rule, it is a lot smarter to stay on the correct side of a trend. We know home advantage over the last 20 to 25 years has had a big impact on how MMA fights are scored, and so you want to stay on the side of the trend, not betting the exception to the rule. Like Crown says, the trend is your friend until the end of the trend, and I'd much rather have my money on hometown fighters in competitive fights against fighters that have to battle the judges, the hometown crowd, and the hometown fighter. The other guy, or the other athlete, the other UFC fighter on this card with home advantage will be Kevin Aguilar. He still lives and trains in Texas, whereas Andrea Lee now lives and trains in, I believe, Louisiana. But Kevin Aguilar will also have home advantage on his side. So yeah, these are just some X factors that I wouldn't usually talk about, but I do think they're very relevant to the fights this weekend. And I do think if you're betting these fights this weekend, you really should, bear these factors in mind. And I'm taking them very, very seriously because personally, we're doing really well as a community this year and over the last 12 months when it comes to betting. If we look at our results on pre-fight bets over the last, sort of 12 to 13 to 14 months, we can just see very, very positive results. This is a beautiful profitability chart. This, I can tell you, is a very, very difficult event for betting. What I love about this event is that there's a lot of competitive fights. If we look at the odds on this event, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of the 12 fights taking place this week have all got odds close to that even money odds range, which is a sign that we've got tons and tons of competitive fights this week. And I absolutely love it. I absolutely love the fact that we've got competitive fights this week because these are usually the events that I thrive on. Whenever we've got competitive matchups, we can really dig into those fights, research them, and if we can lean 60-40 one way or the other, we can quite often find really strong positions to put our cash. Unfortunately, I am really, really struggling with this card. I thought this card on paper was a great event for betting, but as I'm working my way through each of these matchups, I'm not finding that many strong positions to put my cash. And what I don't want to do is undo all this great work that we've been doing and risk taking, a big loss on this card. That's not what I want. So I'm going to keep this event tight. I'm going to share with you guys, what I think about each of these matchups. But just know I'm finding this event very, very difficult from a pre-fight betting point of view. I don't want to waste your guys' time. I'm finding this one real tricky, and I'm finding every single fight that I'm going to talk to you in this video about tricky to find a strong lean on. Or actually, I've got strong leans, but not, strong positions for me to put my cash. The silver lining in all of this is that whenever you've got an event that is likely to feature a lot of competitive matchups, that makes the event amazing for live betting, because the best fights are live betting are fights which go the distance and feature tons of momentum swings, so that you can read how momentum is swinging within the matchup and try and find decent positions to put your money for live betting. So while this event doesn't look great for pre-fight betting, it looks absolutely fucking excellent for live betting. And of course, live betting is where I do my best work. I say to you guys all the time, everyone has their specialities, right? If you look at, different positions in football, a wide receiver isn't going to be an effective quarterback. A quarterback isn't going to be an effective wide receiver. Every position has that thing they're good at, their speciality. Live betting is my jam. Live betting is my thing. You can see a phenomenally great profitability chart, over the years, live betting UFC. And I will say this event looks absolutely fantastic from a live betting point of view, but it's tricky from a pre-fight betting point of view. So, with all that being said, let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in this video. And remember, we are going to be, we're not going to keep repeating ourselves, but those X factors that I've just spoken about are pretty important. So let's get into the fight between Rogerio Bontorin and Matt Schnell. First of all, let's start off by taking a look at the odds. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we've currently got Matt Schnell as the favourite at odds of about 1.65, which is minus... Why isn't my website working? Let me just reload this. 2 seconds. Sorry about this, guys. 1.65. There we go. 1.6. I panicked then. I was like, oh shit, my website's broke. 1.65, which is minus 154 for an implied probability of 61%. And if we take a look at the odds on Rogerio Bontorin, he is the slight underdog at odds of 2.30, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So in the eyes of the bookies, this is roughly about 60-40 in favour of Matt Schnell. And I would agree with them. I think the odds on this fight are roughly where they should be. There's a huge X factor in this matchup, which very much makes me lean towards Matt Schnell here. If we take a look at Rogerio Bontorin, we can see that he's very, very small for a bantamweight. He's only 5'5" with a 67-inch reach. Matt Schnell is 5'8" with a 72.5-inch reach. So Matt Schnell is going to have a big 5-inch reach advantage here, and he's also going to be a lot taller. Bontorin will be very, very small and undersized in this fight because, of course, he has been fighting at flyweight, and with this wingspan, 5'5" with a 67-inch reach, he should be fighting at flyweight. He is far too small to be fighting at bantamweight. This is going to be his first fight at bantamweight, and I don't like it. I think it's a big mistake. Schnell will be a lot bigger. He'll be able to fight a lot longer, which means it's going to be harder for Bontorin to get inside on Schnell standing, and it's going to be hard for Bontorin to get anything going on the ground because Schnell is going to be a lot bigger and more physically imposing than him. I believe Bontorin is making this step up from flyweight to bantamweight because one thing that has plagued him in all of his fights so far in the UFC is his gas tank. But what's really interesting about Bontorin is that I don't actually think his cardio is that bad. I think Bontorin's issue is that he has bad pacing. I would compare him to Phil Hawes. In last week's breakdown video, we were saying Phil Hawes doesn't actually have bad cardio. Pacing is Phil Hawes' issue, where over the years he's come out in round one super aggressive, put everything into finishing his opponent in round one, and when he doesn't manage to finish his opponent in round one, he then kind of panics, adrenaline dumps, and fades mentally into the second and third round. When Phil Hawes has now improved his pacing and his fight IQ and his strategy since moving to Sanford MMA, we saw last weekend against Carl Dorcas that he's just fighting a lot smarter, right? His gas tank's fine. He was the far fresher fighter in round 3 against Dorcas. And I see a very, very similar issue with Bontorin. I don't think he's got a bad gas tank. I just think he goes way too hard in round 1 and burns himself out. If he would spread his output out across 3 rounds, I actually think he'd be a pretty decent fighter. But I think Bontorin moving up from flyweight to bantamweight is trying to put a band-aid on a chainsaw wound and is not addressing the root cause of his problem. Now, on one hand, moving up from flyweight to bantamweight could have a really positive impact on Bontorin's gas tank. Maybe the reason why Bontorin does slow down is because his weight cut to flyweight is brutal, but it really shouldn't be, because at 5'5" with a 67-inch reach, he's not a particularly big flyweight, so there would be no reason why he would gas out that bad and need to go up to bantamweight. But if it is a bad weight cut for him and that's the reason why he's gassing out, it could help him. On the other side of the coin though, moving up to bantamweight could actually make his cardio worse, because at bantamweight he's going to be carrying all that extra weight, which could slow him down. It could make his gas tank even worse. So I'm not sure what to expect from Bontorin this week, which is what kind of makes this fight pretty difficult. We don't exactly know what we're going to get from Bontorin moving up from flyweight to bantamweight, but what we do know is that he's going to be a lot smaller than Schnell, and that will have a big impact in both the striking and the grappling areas of this fight. Matt Schnell is also a tricky one, because we don't really know what to expect from Schnell either. In his last fight against Tyson Nam, Schnell showed up and performed like we'd never seen from him before. Schnell fought very strategically, very tactically, and put in a very, very smart performance. Schnell's issue throughout his career is that he's been very reckless, and he's been one of these guys that would just come out, get sucked into a brawl, and ultimately get rocked, dropped, wobbled, or knocked out a lot, because he didn't have the chin to back up that brawling style of fighting. Against Tyson Nam, for the first time ever, we saw Schnell fight very smart and focus on defense first. He recognized that Tyson Nam was one of the biggest power punchers in the division, and as a result of that, Schnell didn't want to take any risks, didn't want to risk himself getting knocked out, and instead he played the role of matador. He stayed on the outside, counter-struck, used Tyson Nam's forward pressure against him, and showed brilliant footwork, brilliant head movement to pick Nam apart and quite honestly outclass him over 3 rounds. But that was the first and only time we've ever seen Schnell look like that. Usually what we get from Schnell is he comes out the gate super aggressive, tries to drag his opponent into a crazy brawl, a crazy war, and sometimes he gets a finish, sometimes he gets knocked out. Schnell very much before that Nam fight had a kill or be killed style, and because he didn't really have the chin to back that style up, it would quite frequently result in him taking huge damage in fights and getting himself knocked out. Now, what is very interesting is obviously between his fight against Alexandre Pantoja, where he fought like a crazy person, he literally just came out and tried to play rock'em sock'em robots with Pantoja. But between this matchup and his fight against Tyson Nam, there's obviously a 2-year gap. And in that time, Matt Schnell moved. Sorry, my dog's going crazy. In that time, I will be right back. Alright, apologies about that, guys. I've actually got some equipment coming to shoot this box break on Friday, and my dog went fucking crazy. And obviously I had to take the delivery because we need to get that box break done on Friday. But now we're back to the Matt Schnell versus Rogerio Bontorin fight. So, picking up where we left off. This is a tricky one because we don't know what version of Rogerio Bontorin we're going to get moving up from flyweight to bantamweight. We also don't know what version of Matt Schnell we're going to get because he fought with a crazy reckless style before the Tyson Nam matchup. But since moving to Fortis MMA in between 29 and 2021 against Tyson Nam, he fought way smarter. He just fought way more strategically, way more tactically, and used his striking in reverse to fight very safe and counter-strike. The problem with betting this matchup is that we don't know what version of Schnell we're going to get. Is that version of Schnell that we saw against Tyson Nam, the new version of Schnell that we're now going to get every single time that he fights? Or is Schnell going to revert back to how he used to fight and come out and look at get into a crazy brawl against Rogerio Bontorin? It's very, very difficult to say. On one hand, you can look at it and you can go, Schnell has clearly made big improvements since moving to Fortis MMA, and now this is the new Schnell. But on the other hand, you could say fighters are a creature of habit, and maybe that was just a one-off performance he put in against Tyson Nam because he respected Tyson Nam's power. He was coming in after suffering, a really bad knockout at the hands of Pantoja, And, he didn't want that to happen again against Tyson Nam. But will he go back to his old reckless self? It's very, very tough to say. What I would say about this matchup is that it's fraught with risk, because we don't know how Bontorin is going to look going up from flyweight to bantamweight, and I don't think one fight is enough to trust that Schnell is turning the corner and starting to fight much smarter. Because if he does come out and look to get into a brawl like he did against Pantoja and all the other guys that he fought before he trained at Fortis MMA, he could easily get himself knocked out here. One of Schnell's biggest weaknesses is that he's very, very chinny. Bad defensively, chinny, and has got rocked, dropped, wobbled, knocked out so many times throughout his career. What I would say, though, is that his size will help him. If he wants to utilise a counter-striking style and pick Bontorin off, he's obviously got that 5-inch reach advantage, which will make it harder for Bontorin to get inside on him. And both these guys are primarily grapplers. They've both got a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. If this fight goes to the ground, Bontorin at 5'5" is going to find it very, very difficult to deal with the size and physicality of Schnell. Schnell's longer limbs are going to make it much harder for Bontorin to control him, and we know that Schnell is absolutely vicious on the ground. He's extremely good off his back. Schnell doesn't even bother to try and stuff takedowns because of how dangerous he is off his back with his guillotines and triangles. So if Bontorin does take this fight to the ground, Bontorin's a pretty strong wrestler, he's going to have a lot of work to do, because he's going to have to constantly defend himself with the submissions that Schnell is going to be attacking him with, which could accelerate the rate at which he gasses out. But this fight is a tricky one, because if Bontorin does come out the gate very aggressive in round one, we know that in the past Schnell hasn't been the kind of guy that is going to try and take a backward step, counter strike, and just weather that early storm. We've seen Schnell so many times plant his feet, look to play rock and sock and robots, and just fire back in an effort to alleviate pressure that his opponent puts on him. And so this is just a really crazy, dangerous fight for betting, because it's difficult to bet Schnell, because we don't know if that performance against Tyson Nam was a one-off. We don't know how Bontorin's going to look at bantamweight, and Schnell is chinny and reckless. But it's risky to bet on Bontorin. He's moving up a weight class. He's got a questionable gas tank. And Schnell is probably a better striker and probably a better grappler. So with this matchup, I think the odds are roughly where they should be. I really do feel like... Schnell should be the slight favourite, but there's just no value on either guy. I would really, really recommend that you pass on this fight. This is not a fight that I would touch, personally. Now let's talk about the fight between Edson Barboza and Shane Burgos. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Edson Barboza is currently the slight underdog at odds of about 2.10, which is plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. If we take a look at the odds on Shane Burgos, he's currently the favourite. Odds are about 1.77, which is minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. Out of all the fights that I've researched this week on this card, this is the one that I'm finding most difficult to get a read on. With both these guys in that even money territory, indicating that the bookies believe this is a coin flip that could go either way, I would very much agree with them. This is a very difficult fight for me to call, because both guys have got weaknesses that the other can exploit. Neither guy is a safe bet here, and they could both definitely struggle with some of the things that their opponent does well. So first of all, let's talk about the reasons why Shane Burgos can cause Edson Barboza a problem. The style that has caused Edson Barboza a problem throughout his career has been pressure fighters. This is because Edson Barboza has a predominantly kicks-based style of striking. When we think about Edson Barboza, what do we associate him with? We associate him with good footwork, good movement, great leg kicks, great body kicks, and, crazy spinning taekwondo kicks, right? But the thing that we associate Edson Barboza with is all kicks. This guy has a kicks-based style of striking. His boxing isn't very good. He's not very good with his hands, and he's quite bad when it comes to boxing defense. This is why Edson Barboza struggles against pressure fighters. If we look back at his record, guys that have caused him problems like Dan Ige, Justin Gaethje, Khabib utilised the pressure fighting style against him, so did Kevin Lee, and so did Tony Ferguson. If you are brave enough, skilled enough, and tough enough to come forward, walk Edson Barboza down and put him onto the back foot, he struggles very, very bad because in order to get his kicks off, he needs time and space. Very, very difficult to throw effective kicks while moving backwards. And so if you come forward, pressure this guy, and put him on the back foot, he is nowhere near as effective. Which is what makes this a very interesting fight, because Shane Burgos is obviously a pressure fighter. When we think of Shane Burgos, what does he like to do? Well, he likes to come forward with a lot of pressure, put his opponent on the back foot, and force them to react to what he is doing. He is very much a pressure fighter, and historically, pressure fighters have done very well against Edson Barboza, which is why I think Burgos is the favourite here. I think people are looking at the fact that Barboza has struggled against guys with a similar style to Burgos in the past, and that's why they're betting Burgos here, and I do get it. But when I researched this fight, what was pretty concerning to me is that even though Shane Burgos does a great job of pressuring his opponents, when he forces them into that uncomfortable range, there isn't much end product. So what I mean by that is when we've seen Barboza struggle against pressure fighters like Khabib or Kevin Lee or Justin Gaethje or Tony Ferguson, when all those guys came forward and put Barboza into that uncomfortable range where he wasn't particularly good at defending himself, they were either attacking Barboza with strikes or shooting takedown attempts. The difference with Shane Burgos is that when he pressures, puts his opponent into that uncomfortable range, but then he doesn't really pull the trigger, which is completely different to the other guys Barboza has struggled against. So this is one of those situations where Burgos definitely has the ability to get inside and put Barboza onto the back foot because he's got good head movement, a great chin, a good ability to read his opponents, but there's just not that much end product there. And a big problem with Shane Burgos is that he is very bad defensively. Because he's such a high-level skilled striker, he relies very much on his head movement, his footwork, and his ability to read his opponent to kind of roll with the punches and slip shots and defend himself in that way. He likes to come forward with a lot of pressure with his hands down low. He's very, very susceptible to leg kicks because he stands heavy on his lead leg, which is obviously an issue against Barboza because leg kicks are one of his biggest weapons. And we also know Barboza is extremely fast. So with Burgos relying so much on his ability to read his opponent to defend himself, if he makes one mistake, he could find himself getting dropped or knocked out against a guy as dangerous as Barboza. And we saw him have this issue against Kurt Holloway and Josh Emmett that were able to knock him down, catch him cold, hurt him very, very bad. So this is a very interesting matchup because Edson Barboza is at his best when you fight him in the middle of the octagon in kickboxing range where he can use his superior technique to chip away at you. And that's where we see performances from Barboza like we saw from him against, Dan Hooker or Makwan Amirkhani where, he's inflicting major damage on Hooker, or he's knocking Amirkhani down with these flashy Superman punches. The reason why a guy like Barboza has so much success against fighters like Amirkhani and Hooker, because they enabled Barboza to fight in that comfortable range, in the middle of the octagon, where he's got the time and space to get his kicks off. If you pressure Barboza, he's nowhere near as effective, and Burgos can pressure him. So that's why I'm having such a difficult time finding a strong lean on this fight, because both guys can cause the other an issue. I am definitely passing on this matchup. I really wouldn't recommend you bet this fight, because Burgos has that pressure fighting style which can take away the kicking game of Barboza. But when Burgos puts his opponent onto the back foot, there's no end product. He doesn't land a lot. And he's very, very bad defensively, which means, he's going to be a sitting duck to Barboza's leg kicks and a sitting duck to the flashy kind of shit Barboza likes to attack with. So I would not recommend betting this fight. It is an easy pass for me, the easiest pass on the whole card. And this one's a very, very tough fight for betting. Now let's talk about the fight between Katlyn Chookagian and Viviane Araujo. So Viviane Araujo was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card, because from memory I felt she was better than Katlyn Chookagian everywhere. And after we researched this matchup, to be fair, she is, but because of some of the nuances with how these two girls match up, it is difficult to bet on Viviane Araujo here. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Chookagian is currently a 1.74 favourite, which is minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. And if we take a look at the odds on Viviane Araujo, she is currently the underdog at odds of 2.15, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So there is no doubt in my mind that Viviane Araujo is better than Chookagian almost everywhere. Chookagian has one of those styles which is just not that effective. She's very, very big for the division at 5'9" with a 68-inch reach. That makes her one of the biggest fighters in the division, but she doesn't use that reach very well. She is predominantly a striker, but her striking is painfully inaccurate. If you go and watch Chookagian in any of her fights, you'll see that she's very much like Neil Magny. She throws a lot, but she doesn't land a lot. Very, very inaccurate. Most of her shots fall short or are caught on the hands and gloves of her opponent. She misses a lot. She's painfully inaccurate. Just not a very effective striker. And because of that, she really struggles to put her stamp on rounds. Chookagian is often involved in close fights because she's busy enough to make rounds competitive and close, but doesn't do enough with her output to actually put her stamp on rounds, because she just doesn't land a lot that's clean, and she doesn't really have any power in her hands, which means she doesn't inflict damage on her opponent either. You know, if we look at her record, we can see that she is an absolute decisionator, and on top of that, she's fought to a good number of split decisions. You know, one split decision here, one here, and where was the other one? One here. And I personally feel she lost the fight to Jennifer Maia. I think that was a bad judging decision. But remember what we were saying, about this card, UFC 262. Fights that are likely to be close and competitive are very, very dangerous from a betting point of view because of how bad these Texan judges are going to be. And Chookagian's one of those fighters that is skilled enough to be competitive with her opponent everywhere, but she's not skilled enough to go out there and really put her stamp on rounds and dominate. You get the occasional anomalous performance, like a very, very solid performance from her against Antonina Shevchenko, but for the most part, if you go back and watch any of Chookagian's fights, they're all razor close. Even the Joanne Calderwood fight was pretty close. It was really only the Shevchenko and Calvillo fights where she looked dominant. So this is a very, very tricky one, because Viviane Araujo is a fighter who is very fast, very accurate, and does major damage with her striking. Both these girls are primarily strikers, so I would expect this fight to take place standing. And the difference between these two is Chookagian throws a lot of choppy, range-finding strikes out there, which tend to miss a lot and don't do that much damage, whereas Viviane Araujo sits down a lot harder on her shots and inflicts major damage. She doesn't throw with as much volume. Chookagian throws with a very, very high volume, but what Araujo does land is a lot more impactful. It's a very, very similar kind of stylistic matchup to Jeff Neal versus Neil Magny that we saw last week, where, you know, Chookagian's like a Neil Magny, not that effective, doesn't inflict much damage, misses a lot, very inaccurate, doesn't use the reach particularly well. Araujo's like Jeff Neal, a very, very superior striker, hits much harder, much more accurate, much faster, much more powerful, but will struggle to match the volume of Chookagian, and as a result runs the risk of getting outworked, especially in Texas with very, very poor judges. So if this fight stays standing, I do expect Araujo to land the cleaner, harder shots and to do more damage, but Chookagian's likely to outwork Araujo and have more volume. When it comes to grappling, both these girls share very much the same weakness in that they're both incredibly weak off their back. If either of these girls gets a takedown and ends up in top position, they're likely to be able to rack up a lot of top control, because Araujo has absolutely nothing off her back. She's very easy to hold down, and Chookagian is exactly the same. What I would say about both these girls, though, is because of Chookagian's size at 5'9", you know, one of the biggest girls in the division, even though she's very, very weak off her back, from top position, she's very, very heavy. And so if Chookagian can come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, she should have a hell of a lot of success against Viviane Araujo. So Viviane Araujo is one of these fighters that is likely better than Chookagian everywhere. But the problem with Viviane Araujo is because she's so athletic, so powerful, so strong, she does tend to slow down as the fight goes on. If you look at her in the octagon, her body type is very, very big, very muscular, very athletic. and that really comes at a cost. Early in a fight, you'll see her light on her feet, bouncing around with lots of footwork, but as the fight wears on, she becomes a lot flatter, and when her footwork becomes a lot flatter, it's usually a sign she's getting tired, and when that happens, she becomes easier to take down and easier to hit, to the point where in her last fight against Roxanne Modafferi, in the second half of the fight, Modafferi was actually able to inflict a decent amount of damage because Araujo was too tired to adequately defend herself. And this is a big issue against Katlyn Chookagian because of the volume that Chookagian, throws. If Chookagian starts to sense that you're getting tired, she'll pick the pace up. And we saw that in her last fight against Cynthia Calvillo. So this is one of those matchups where Araujo's definitely better than Chookagian everywhere, but the question is for how long, for how much of the fight is Araujo going to be better than Chookagian? Araujo's likely to do very well in round one and win round one and do great, but as the fight wears on and she starts to become flatter and slow down, Chookagian could take over. But there is also one huge X factor on this matchup that we've got to take into consideration, and that is that Chookagian may already have one foot out the door. If we look at Chookagian, we can see that on her Instagram profile, it says that she's a real estate investor, and she has obviously also spoken about, her body clock being 32 years old and wanting children soon. Now, this is a huge red flag for me because whenever a fighter starts to talk about retirement or life after fighting, it's usually a sign that they've got one foot out the door. And usually, as a general rule, remember we like to stay on the side of trends, as a general rule, when a fighter starts to talk about the end of their career or retirement, generally speaking, their career tends to nosedive. Now, I know Chookagian has come out and said, look, even though I want children, even though I know I'm 32 years old, it's going to have to happen soon. My head is still fully in the fight game. I'm motivated to be the champion. The fact that I'm thinking about life after the UFC is not having any impact on my performances at all. I'm still training hard. I'm still motivated. It's a red flag. It's a huge, huge, huge red flag. So what I would say about this fight, just to summarize everything that we've spoken about, this is a good stylistic matchup for Viviane Araujo because she's better than Katlyn Chookagian everywhere. But it's dangerous to bet on Araujo because of how flat she becomes in the second half of the fight. This fight is especially risky to bet on because Chookagian, again, like we said, she's a decisionator. She's good enough to drag any girl in the division into a close competitive fight. And with how bad the judges are in Texas, you are taking a big gamble if you bet on either of these girls. Honestly, I feel you'd be better off going to play roulette or something. This one's a total gamble. This one's a total coin flip. And I would urge you guys not to bet this fight this week. It's really, really important that on weeks where there aren't that many strong positions for us to put our cash, we keep it tight and we protect profits. We don't feel pressured into rolling the dice on fighters that are in high-risk situations and don't present us with that good of a risk-to-reward ratio to make money. So, this one's tough, man. I would definitely pass on this fight if I were you. Now let's talk about the fight between Beneil Dariush and Tony Ferguson in the co-main event of UFC 262. So out of all the fighters on the card this week, Beneil Dariush was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you're also strongly considering betting Beneil Dariush this weekend, or maybe you've already bet him. And I absolutely 100% don't blame you for betting Dariush this weekend. It's not for me personally for the reasons that I'm going to explain in this breakdown video, but I can definitely understand why people like Dariush a lot this week. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this matchup, we can see that the odds on Beneil Dariush have been steadily declining all week, and now he's down to an average of around, I would say, 1.61, which is going to be minus 164 for an implied probability of 62%. If we take a look at the odds on Tony Ferguson, he is currently around about an average of 2.45, which is plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. So the bookies roughly seeing this fight as around about 60-40 in favour of Beneil Dariush, and I would agree with them, or possibly lean a little bit more towards Dariush than having a 60% chance of winning. So I 100% accept that Tony Ferguson looks completely shot. if we look at how he's performed in his last 2 fights, they've given us so much information about Tony Ferguson and where he's at in his career right now. Obviously, Father Time's undefeated, and at 37 years old, Tony Ferguson is on a steep decline. It's undeniable. 37 years old is very, very old in the lighter weight classes, and with 30 pro fights and all the wars we've seen in Ferguson, Ferguson involved in over the years, it's no surprise that this guy's on a steep decline. He's taken tons of damage in his fights. He's battled tons and tons and tons of injuries, blown knees, all kinds of bad injuries that have plagued Ferguson throughout his career. So it's no surprise to see him looking, completely shot, to be honest with you, at 37 years old. And if we look at his last 2 fights, what's very interesting about his last 2 performances is that they've shown his decline in very different ways. Obviously, his fight against Charles Oliveira was a predominantly grappling-based fight, and we saw Ferguson just look physically weak on the ground. I know Charles Oliveira is a very, very high-level grappler, but he was quite honestly manhandling Ferguson on the ground like he was a child. It looked like a grown man fighting a teenager. And this was really, really out of character for Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson, a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Eddie Bravo. I know that Ferguson's never been great off his back, but the way Oliveira was able to handle him on the ground was quite shocking. And it highlighted the physical decline that Tony Ferguson's on right now. On top of that, Tony Ferguson looked visibly old in that fight. He really looked like Father Time was catching up on him, and visually you could see the decline in that fight. It was very obvious. But then the Justin Gaethje fight was a stand-up fight, and we saw a decline from Tony Ferguson in other ways. We know as fighters get older, one of the first things to go are their reflexes, and that really showed in the fight against Justin Gaethje because he didn't see the shots coming, and he also didn't react well to being hit. When Justin Gaethje was catching him clean and hard, he would get caught off balance, he would turn his back to Gaethje, and he would just demonstrate body language and behaviours that we're not used to seeing from fighters at the very top of the UFC. Ferguson was not reacting well to being hit, and so in those 2 matchups you saw the decline in Ferguson's physical appearance against Oliveira, you saw the decline in Ferguson and his physicality on the ground, and then against Gaethje you very much saw a decline in his reflexes and timing and accuracy and ability to read his opponent. It's all kinds of bad. So I completely, unequivocally and totally understand why people are betting Beneil Dariush here. Because Dariush, 32 years old, 5'10", with a 72-inch reach. He's a very, very strong grappler. Very, very dangerous Muay Thai striker. Dariush, based on Ferguson's last 2 fights, will have an advantage over Ferguson everywhere. And the thing about when fighters are on a decline in the tail end of their career, we know that there's no happy endings in MMA, and it's very, very unlikely that Ferguson looks better against Dariush than he has in his last 2. These declines at 37 years old, they don't flip. It's not like Ferguson's going to be improving at this stage in his career. He's only going to be getting worse. So his last 2 performances are a giant red flag, because Dariush can essentially do exactly what Charles Oliveira did in the last fight: take Ferguson down and manhandle him. Dariush has got decent offensive wrestling, and he's a very, very high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. I know he's not on the level of Charles Oliveira on the ground, but he's certainly, skilled enough to utilise the same game plan Oliveira utilised to cause Ferguson big, big trouble on the ground. So Oliveira kind of wrote the blueprint on how to beat Ferguson without putting yourself in that much danger, and Dariush definitely has the skills to emulate that. When it comes to striking, Tony Ferguson has never really had the power in his hands to hurt his opponent, right? Ferguson's been more of a volume striker that's broken guys down with volume and pressure. And so the one weakness that we see with Dariush in his striking is that he's very, very reckless. Pretty bad boxing defense, again, because like we were saying with Edson, Dariush has a very kicks-based style of striking, so his punching's not great and his boxing defense isn't great. But that shouldn't be too much of an issue here, because it's not like Tony Ferguson has that kind of one-shot KO power to really punish him for being bad defensively. However, we do have to make it clear that Dariush defensively isn't great. There's no doubt that offensively he's a lot more dangerous than Ferguson, but defensively he does take a lot of damage. We saw him get wobbled a couple of times in his last fight against Carlos Diego Ferreira. We also saw him get wobbled against Drakkar Klose. And that's a little bit of a concern because Klose and Ferreira aren't exactly dangerous. And I'm not sure that a split decision win over Carlos Diego Ferreira is that impressive anymore when we see how bad Carlos Diego Ferreira struggled against Gregor Gillespie last weekend. So Dariush is a guy who will have a big advantage on the ground, should have a big advantage standing up as well. Plus we know Ferguson's on a decline. There's lots of reasons to like Dariush here. So why am I not recommending a bet on Dariush? Is probably the question you're asking. Well, obviously something that we've spoken about a lot this week with UFC 262 is the impact that a crowd is likely to have on fighters, or could have on fighters. We saw the crowd have a massive influence on the way that fighters performed when the UFC went back to Jacksonville, Florida at UFC 261. And I'm expecting something similar from the fans in Houston at UFC 262. The major weakness that has plagued Beneil Dariush throughout his career is that his gas tank is sketchy. He comes out the gate very, very hard in round one and tends to slow down and become a lot less effective as the fight wears on. If we look at his record, we haven't seen his gas tank really tested that much over the last few years because so many of his fights have ended inside the distance. But he did slow down against Carlos Diego Ferreira and looked quite sloppy in the second and third round. He obviously gassed very, very bad against Evan Dunham, pretty bad against Rashid Magomedov too, and against Michael Johnson. And we know throughout Beneil Dariush's career, he becomes a lot less effective as the fight wears on. Even though Tony Ferguson has shown major signs of decline in his last two fights, what he's also shown in his last two fights is that his gas tank is still phenomenal. Even into that fifth round against Gaethje, he wasn't breathing heavy, he was still in the fight, and he was stopped purely down to damage. What I'm really worried about for Beneil Dariush here is the crowd causing him to adrenaline dump. This is the biggest fight of his career. He's been talking about a title shot for a very long time, and now he's in the co-main event of a big pay-per-view against a big name opponent, for the first time. This is the biggest name Dariush has ever fought. And I'm really, really worried that with his history of gassing out, he's going to come out under the crazy atmosphere we're likely to see in Houston, look to put it on Ferguson, and end up burning himself and gassing out like we've seen him do many, many times in the past. We saw a lot of fighters on that UFC 261 card adrenaline dump and burn themselves out. And Dariush does have a history of gassing, which is a bit of a red flag with this one. Now, even though Dariush does have a risk of gassing out, his skill gap on the ground and standing up, will probably still be enough to carry him through. But I guess the question is, do you want to bet on a guy with a bad gas tank fighting at UFC 262 when the atmosphere is going to be electric for this co-main event? The judging's going to be bad, and he's going up against a fan favourite. The Houston crowd is likely to get behind Tony Ferguson in a really, really big way. And there is also one more thing that we could perhaps speculate could occur this weekend. It's total speculation, but it is worth noting that Tony Ferguson's decline does seem to be quite sudden. So if you look at the difference in athleticism and the way that Tony Ferguson kind of carried himself and was able to move between the Donald Cerrone fight and the Justin Gaethje fight, it's like night and day. Ferguson looked pretty sharp against Cerrone, whereas he looked shot and an absolute shadow of himself against Justin Gaethje. Now, there was less than a year between those two fights, but the decline in just a year was absolutely massive. On UFC 261, we saw a guy in Anthony Smith that had looked totally shot in his fights in the Apex Center. He looked a shadow of himself when he fought Glover Teixeira against Alexander Rakic. The fire wasn't there, he didn't look motivated, and he just looked very flat. He looked shot. Anthony Smith was showing all the signs of a fighter on a really, really steep decline. But then at UFC 261 against Jimmy Crute, he had like a glow about him. He was full of energy. As he walked to the cage, he was like singing, he was dancing, he looked so relaxed, and you could see he was really feeding off the energy of the crowd. Something that's quite interesting here is that Tony Ferguson's last 2 fights were behind closed doors on either Fight Island or the Apex Center. Is Tony Ferguson one of these guys that thrives off the crowd and takes energy from the crowd in order to perform to his full potential? And was a big part of Tony Ferguson looking bad in his last 2 fights the fact that he just couldn't get it going in basically an empty arena, in a training environment. We hear stories about these fighters that are world championship level fighters in the gym, but they can't turn it on and perform under the bright lights of the UFC on fight night, and so they never make it. And then we've also heard about these fighters that are very average in the gym. They're nothing special, but because they can beat performance anxiety and they can turn it on fight night, and they can basically thrive under the bright lights and feed off the energy of the crowd, these fighters overperform. Is Tony Ferguson one of those guys? I believe Anthony Smith is. It's interesting. So, I completely understand why people are betting Beneil Dariush this weekend. Based on Tony Ferguson's last 2 performances, I don't blame them, because Dariush looked horrendous. But what I will say is, with the craziness of, the fans in the arena, with the bad judging, and with Dariush's tendency to gas out in fights, especially if they're kind of like high-paced fights that just turn into crazy wars, which is exactly what Ferguson seems to like, I'm just going to pass on this one. And like I say, we've been doing great. You know what I mean? Pre-fight betting results, the charts are doing good. We're grinding out good profits long term. I just feel that this is a very, very risky card to bet with the X factors we've spoken about. And unless I see a really strong position for us to put our money, a bet with a really good risk to reward ratio, I would much prefer to chill and hope that we could dig up something better on next week's card. We still got 5 fights to research on this event. I'm hoping we will dig up some pre-fight bets, but I don't feel comfortable betting on Dariush as a big favourite, because he does have gas tank issues, and fighters are prone to adrenaline dump, in the kind of environment we saw at UFC 261. So this one's going to be a pass from me. Let me know what you thought in the comments though, boys. I know this is a fight that, a lot of people are feeling really passionate about. Just let me know what you think, man. Everyone's got different opinions. I don't hate on anyone for betting Dariush. I guess I'm just being overly cautious on this card because we're doing well and I just want to protect profits. So now let's get into the next fight. It's going to be the main event. We're going to talk about Charles Oliveira against Michael Chandler. And this fight, to be quite frank, is utter, total and complete chaos. It is absolutely mental. Charles Oliveira was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card. And again, like so many of the fights on this card, I was really disappointed that after doing research on this matchup, I'm not going to be able to bet Charles Oliveira for the reasons that I'm going to explain in this breakdown video. So if we take a look at the odds on this fight, we've got Charles Oliveira currently around about an average of 1.77, which is minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. And if we take a look at the odds on Michael Chandler, he is currently around about an average of 2.10, which is plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. So close to a 50-50 fight in the eyes of the bookies. And I definitely lean towards Charles Oliveira, but I don't lean towards him with anywhere near as much confidence as I did before I researched this fight. And that's predominantly because of the fighting styles of both guys. If you go back and watch, any of Michael Chandler's fights, or if you go back and watch, any of Charles Oliveira's fights over the last 2 to 3 years where his striking has really improved tremendously, you will see that to some extent they've kind of got the same style, where they both like to come forward and pressure their opponent. Charles Oliveira likes to come forward, put tons of pressure on his opponent, and he refuses to take a backward step. Michael Chandler is exactly the same. He comes forward with loads of pressure, loads of aggression, and he refuses to take a backward step. But obviously when you've got 2 guys like that want to be the aggressor, 2 guys that want to come forward and will not take a backward step, something has to give. They can't both be the aggressor. When they come together, someone's got to be the alpha, someone's got to be the beta. And based on past performances, I have no idea who that is going to be. Darren Till is quoted as saying something that definitely applies to this matchup and something that makes this matchup so difficult for betting. Darren Till said that when you put yourself in a position to finish your opponent, you also put yourself in a position to be finished. And if you go and watch any of Michael Chandler or Charles Oliveira's recent fights, you'll see that this is very much present with both these guys. They are reckless as fuck. Very, very bad defensively in different ways. And because both of these guys are so dangerous on the attack and so bad defensively, honestly, like, the probability of one of these guys getting finished early is really high. Charles Oliveira and Chandler have defensive issues in different ways. Charles Oliveira comes forward in a Muay Thai stance, but he just doesn't move his head ever. Like, he is a sitting duck to the knockout. Doesn't move his head, comes forward with a stiff, rigid style. And while he's incredibly dangerous going forward, he's got great Muay Thai, throws a wide range of strikes, very, very slick Muay Thai. Defensively, he's just not good. And because he won't take a backward step, he's constantly moving forward onto the threat of a knockout counter. Michael Chandler is also very bad defensively. Chandler likes to come forward, put his opponent onto the back foot, but when he opens up and lets his big power punches go, he's completely oblivious to what his opponent may do to counter. Chandler is so dangerous. Chandler has so much knockout power because he throws everything into his power punches. His nickname Iron, after Mike Tyson, Iron Mike Tyson, tells you everything you need to know about the way Chandler throws punches. He throws everything that he's got into punches, but when he throws hard, he's just completely, totally and utterly vulnerable to counter shots. His head doesn't move, his chin is a stationary target, and we've seen Michael Chandler get rocked, dropped, wobbled and knocked out so many times in his past fights. He was wobbled by Sydney Outlaw, knocked out by Pitbull, wobbled multiple times in this fight against Brent Primus, wobbled by Brandon Gertz. The problem with Michael Chandler is that he has this reckless style of fighting, but he doesn't have the chin to back it up. And that's why this is a very dangerous fight for betting, because both guys are going to want to come forward, take control of the centre of the octagon and put the other onto the back foot, but they don't have the chin or the defensive skills to back it up. We've spoken this week about Shane Burgos. Shane Burgos is a guy that likes to apply a lot of pressure, but the difference is Burgos is very good at reading his opponents and using subtle head movement to slip shots and ride and roll with the punches. Chandler and Oliveira aren't like that. They get caught clean, they get caught hard, and they are both super susceptible to the knockout. So straight away, that's a reason why this one's risky as fuck. I am expecting fireworks in round one. But we've spoken a lot about how these guys match up from a striking point of view, and that's predominantly because every fight starts standing, and also because Chandler and Oliveira have kind of evolved into kind of like strikers, I suppose, over the last few years. But it's important to remember that both these guys are primarily grapplers. Michael Chandler, former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler. Charles Oliveira, ultra high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But what's very interesting about these guys is that they seem to prefer to keep fights standing these days. What I would say, though, is Michael Chandler does use his wrestling as a tool to alleviate pressure and buy himself some time. So if he's getting tired in a fight, that's where he'll look to take his opponent down. And if his opponent's putting a lot of pressure on him, or if he's hurt in a fight, again, he'll look to use his wrestling to take his opponent down and kind of take a break and recover with how strong he is on the ground. The problem is Chandler's very, very small for a lightweight. He's only 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. Charles Oliveira, 5'10" with a 74-inch reach. So Oliveira, can fight a lot longer standing, and it'll be harder for Chandler to get inside on Oliveira and land his big power shots. But this size also plays into the grappling, because on the ground, Oliveira is an ultra high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's very unorthodox on the ground. He's got long, lean, skinny, lanky limbs, which he uses to tie his opponent up with all kinds of nasty submissions. And on the ground, this guy is an absolute nightmare. We were just saying about how Chandler looks to take his opponents down to kind of take breaks in fights. but he won't be able to do that with Oliveira. For similar reasons, Bontorin won't be able to do it against Schnell. Oliveira is one of these guys that is just constantly attacking on the ground. This guy never stops attacking on the ground. And so for that reason, Chandler's going to be forced to work very, very hard on the ground. And because of Oliveira's, submission game and Oliveira's size, I would give Oliveira the advantage on the ground early. What I will say, though, is Oliveira does have a history of quitting in fights when guys stand up to him on the ground. The Paul Felder fight is a great example of this. So are the Ricardo Lamas and Anthony Pettis fights. When Oliveira realised that no matter what kind of position he put Pettis, Lamas or Felder in, they weren't going to go away, he broke very, very quickly against those three guys. Really, really quickly. And the thing about Michael Chandler is he's fucking tough, man. And he inflicts major damage with ground and pound. So while I do think Oliveira can cause Chandler hell on the ground early, the longer the fight goes, I think Chandler will start to have more success on the ground. Now, what's very, very interesting about both these guys is that they do fade as a fight wears on, but they fade in very, very different ways. Michael Chandler, because he's so aggressive and he comes out so hard, Chandler does slow down and gas a bit as the fight goes on. But the difference between Chandler and Oliveira is that Michael Chandler has the heart of a lion, the warrior spirit. He is fucking tough, man. And no matter how tired he gets, he is so fucking game, he will keep bringing it non-stop. Oliveira has a pretty good gas tank. You won't see Oliveira gas out, but Oliveira does fade mentally as the fight wears on. And this is perhaps the biggest reason why I'm not going to be betting Charles Oliveira this week. In so many of the fights, this week we've spoken about how the crowd may have an influence on the fighters this week. And because Charles Oliveira has such a long history of quitting when put in bad positions, it was quite clear this guy suffers from performance anxiety. I'm worried that he is going to crumble under the bright lights of the UFC. Big fight, biggest fight of his career by a mile. He's fighting for the lightweight title. There's going to be fans in the arena generating a crazy atmosphere. He's going up against the guy that won't give him any time to settle. Chandler's going to come out the gate super aggressive and take the fight right to Oliveira. This is one of those fights where we know Chandler will not quit. We've seen him in multiple wars against Will Brooks and Eddie Alvarez. He has got the heart of a lion, a warrior spirit. We've seen him hurt bad in fights, and this guy will keep fighting till his last breath. There is no way this guy will quit. Oliveira, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. If Chandler makes this an ugly fight, roughs Oliveira up, shuts him down on the ground, with the pressure of the title fight, the pressure of the crowd and the atmosphere, I just don't trust Oliveira here at all. So I am going to pass on this fight. But I do lean towards Oliveira because I think early on he could cause Chandler big trouble on the ground. And with his size, his length, he throws a wider range of strikes. I think there's a good chance he knocks Chandler out early because I would say out of the two, Chandler's defense is probably worse. Not helped by the fact that he's so small. So Oliveira won't have to cover as much distance to get to Chandler as Chandler will have to cover to get to him. But let me know what you think in the comments below. I don't really like this card for betting. I'm probably just going to chill for the most part on this card and stick to live betting where I make the majority of my money. So yeah, hopefully you found those breakdowns useful. Don't forget, if you want to watch breakdown videos for all the other fights on this card, check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. Hit the like button to get that prop bet live stream. Hopefully I'll see you in the box break live stream on Friday. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, guys. Subscribe if you haven't already. And above all else, I hope you punch the bookies in the dick this Saturday very hard and take tons of money from them. Nice one for watching, guys. Thanks. I'll see you soon.